Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to today's workshop on building forward better for recovery and resilience, regional marketplace of solutions to address the connections between water, sanitation, hygiene, and climate building towards COP27. We are expecting quite a big group today, and it's been an excellent turnout. For a very long time, the private sector has wanted to lead certain initiatives, and this is the first of those initiatives specifically regarding climate action. For a couple of housekeeping things, the workshop is held in two languages today, in French and English. So interpretation will be offered, simultaneous interpretation during the presentations. But when we go into the breakout rooms, there will be a sort of consecutive interpretation, which means it takes a bit longer. So we would advise you, and I'll remind you when we go into breakouts at a later point, to please speak very slowly so that our interpreters can hear that. I am Kevin Roussel. I'm your moderator for today. And as you can see from the slide, the SWA Regional Coordinator for Africa. We are looking forward to hearing the solutions actually today to many of the challenges that face us. And we have 8 wonderful speakers lined up across 3 thematic areas: enabling environment, data, and the data one's really about measuring and tracking needs and progress, and of course, financing. As I mentioned earlier, there will then be a discussion per topic led by our guest speakers, and thank you to all of them for making themselves available. At which point we will then go into the breakout rooms along those 3 thematic areas. The speakers will play a role of facilitating in those breakout rooms, and we ask you at the onset to get somebody to be a rapporteur who can come back to us in session 4, where we'll report back and discuss with the main room the challenges and, very importantly, the solutions. And then towards the end, we'll have conclusions. So I'm very pleased at this point in time that there are actually 42 of us. I can see on my screen many more are being added as we go along. But without any further ado, let us start off with sorry, let me just give you some introductory notes, which I think I've done already. But as I mentioned, the private sector constituency has been very active in the areas of climate and WASH in particular, and further collaboration across stakeholders was needed to target climate challenges in the country. You may all be aware that the sector ministers meeting this year held in Jakarta was also based on connecting the triple crisis, of which the climate crisis was very much on an equal footing with the other 2, the economy and of course the health crisis. The workshop series is designed to provide a space where you can share these pressing climate-related challenge and WASH challenges, brainstorm potential collaborative solutions, and help structure the discussion towards the enabling environment, data, and financing. And the ideal outcome of this workshop will be a series of practical solutions involving multiple stakeholders. These will then be compiled. The Africa workshop today is following up from an Asia Pacific one, which was held yesterday. And later tomorrow, there will be one held in the LAC region. So the solutions and challenges from these 3 workshops across the globe will then be compiled into a format that can be disseminated with all 76 partner countries and beyond. This outreach will also include presenting the conclusions of the workshop at the COP27 in Egypt this year. So apart from it obviously being a very practical outcome or output for all of us partners in the SWA world, it will also have a global reach at the COP27 in Egypt. Have the next slide, please. So just by a run of show, we've got the 5-minute intro, which we're doing now, 45 minutes for the presentations. They're all extremely exciting. They will also be cut up into the 3. We won't take questions of clarity or comments at this point. We'll allow that to happen in the breakout sessions. So it will firstly be enabling environment, data examples, financing examples, and then we'll break out into those 3 sections. Once again, if you could speak slowly in the breakout rooms, it will help with interpretation. Then we will obviously have the enabling environment summary, Q&A, data summary, financing summary, and ultimately the conclusions and next steps. Because we're such a big group, it would take up too much time to introduce everybody. So I'd advise you to please introduce yourselves in the chat during the course of the workshop. And also, very importantly, when you go into the breakout rooms, introduce yourselves there again so that people in the breakout rooms know who you are. Thank you very much. To the next slide, please. So we're going to kickstart with enabling environment, and I will very briefly introduce the speakers. Our first speaker today is Mr. Vital Tavares, who is the Director of Water at Sanitation from Cabo Verde. They've done some really excellent work around climate change with SWA in the previous year and of course this year. Mr. Tavares, over to you. Welcome. Mr. Tavares, the floor is yours.
Bonjour.
Good morning.
Je peux parler?
Can I speak?
Yes, please go ahead.
May I speak? Yes.
Ok, ça va. Bon,
Okay,
je suis Vital.
Thank you. My name is Vital Tavares.
Important.
Just an important correction.
Le membre du conseil d'administration.
I'm not member of the board of directors. I'm the focal point for Cape Verde for the SWA, and I'm member of the strategic cabinet. Just a small correction.
Ça va?
Okay?
Ok.
Okay.
Maintenant, c'est bon. Pour commencer mon
Just to start my presentation, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. And I'd like to tell you that the photograph, this image, explains the situation of Cape Verde concerning water and climate. You can see the first picture, the situation concerning climate and water. I made some corrections, but they are small corrections. Can we go to the second slide, please? We cannot hear him, unfortunately. I think there is a problem with the connection.
Okay. Mr. Tavares, are you still connected? Let's just have a look. Oh, there we go.
Ok, ça va?
It's perfect. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Now it's okay. When we talk about climate change, this is a reality, and we should find the cause of climate change. Climate change condition many components in terms of meteorology, and mainly as regards well, I would say that Cape Verde is much more vulnerable to climate change than other countries. Since the rains are not torrential, we'll have extreme drought in our country. The problem that we're experiencing in Cape Verde is climate change that works in Cape Verde as a cycle of climate. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Okay, merci.
Okay, thank you. The picture explains the geographic location of Cape Verde. This image we can see on the map the geographically location of Cape Verde, and the climate of this country is mostly conditioned by its location. It's a dry tropical climate, arid and semi-arid. The pluviometry is very limited, and because of that, Cape Verde is using water that is desalination of water. This is our reality. A great deal of the water that is used in Cape Verde by the population, the consumption of of water that has going through the process of desalination. We know that the water resources condition planification, management, and development of all the other sectors, mostly industry, sanitation, agriculture, farming, tourism, and so on. So the last picture that you can see on the bottom of the slide, Cape Verde, this is a reality. Next slide, please.
Mr. Tavares, could you move to some of the solutions, please, because we're going to run out of time. We have 2 minutes left.
Now, speaking about climate impact on water in Cape Verde, we know very well that climate change in Cape Verde cause the problems of subtropical, arid and semi-arid zones, as well as reducing of precipitations that are variable and draft, with a very strong repercussion on the economy, society, and the environment. Water reserves are limited and more limited. The underground water is above the needs, and consequently, we have a hydric stress, lack or scarcity of water, and water crisis. This is our reality in Cape Verde. Next slide, please. As regards the measure of adaptation and mitigation that were adopted, I'd like to tell you that Cape Verde, this has been considered as opportunities to develop the country. This is a very important point. So the adaptation and mitigation in Cape Verde is considered, were considered actually as opportunity of development opportunities. We can see on the image of a meeting about water, the amendments in terms of the water law, increasing of infrastructure, mobilization of fundings and financing, optimization of usage of water, and fight against waste, and using all the resources of water, the diversification of water resources. And another point that is very important is the creation of the renewal funds for water and sanitation. we're adapting and mitigation and using this as opportunities of developing the country. Next slide, please.
La prochaine, s'il vous plaît. OK. Et aussi, on peut voir dans les images
We can see through the images
l'efficacité énergétique
the energetic efficiency
propre pour l'environnement, la
for the
prévention
environment,
contre
prevention
les
and
conflits,
management
gestion des
of
collections,
conflict,
facturation,
management of collection, management of billing, and mostly
entrepreneurisation de la gestion de l'eau,
the
Mr. Tavares, sorry, your time's up. We do have a very limited time for speakers, but I want to thank you for your presentation. So far, I'm going to ask if in the breakout room, you
okay.
could maybe
Deux
share these
minutes.
slides with the group that joins you then. Without any
2
further
minutes
ado,
pour
I'm delighted
terminer.
to welcome
just
Mr.
2 minutes to end, to
It's
finish.
it's not going to be possible. We had only 7 minutes per speaker, so I'll let you give us one final comment, and then we really have to close. Please go ahead.
OK, dans la salle, je peux pas,
Okay.
So I'll talk during the breakouts, but I think that 2 minutes would be sufficient to finish.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
OK, la prochaine.
The next slide, please. Next slides.
La prochaine.
Next slide.
Prochaine. Bon, les mesures d'adaptation des filles.
So the measures of adaptations and mitigation, the challenges, we have planification components, improving of governance and mobilizations of resources and so on. And the last, next please, next slide. Next slide, thank you. Here we can see that Cape Verde has encouraged planification practices of conservation with the recycling and water resources, hydraulic system, electric systems, and so on. Next slide, please. Next one. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of sharing a little bit about Cape Verde, and I will explain more and more in the information about Cape Verde in the room. Thank you for this opportunity. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tavares.
Obrigado.
And thank you
Merci,
again
merci.
for highlighting the vulnerability
Obrigado.
of your home nation of Cape Verde. Those vulnerabilities are of course shared globally, but particularly have a particular context. Thank you also for sharing some of those solutions. And we're looking forward to hearing more of them in the breakout room. Mr. Thierry Barbeau joins us next as our second speaker on the enabling environment. He's been involved in rural water supply sector for about 35 years and has worked in a French consulting engineering firm specialized in water and the environment for the last 18 years. Mr. Barbeau, over to you.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. J'aimerais partager avec vous donc notre expérience du secteur.
Thank you for this introduction. I'd like now to take the floor and share with you our experience in Africa in the water supply sector. As you've said very rightly, we've got a long experience under our belt, more than 50 years in working in Africa, and I will be introducing a new concept we launched in Africa, which is the Uduma concept. If you don't mind playing the showing us the presentation. So this Uduma model is trying to resolve bring solution to practical solutions to water access. So first off, the idea is really to give wide access to population overall, and to mitigate dysfunctioning of poor investment in water facilities. So what we're trying to do is set up a public delegation in rural sectors, much like what is the case in urban sectors. So what we did is that we partnered with the Mali government. Following, please, next slide, please. So we developed this public-private partnership with the Netherlands government as well as the Mali government. And the idea was really to discuss different ideas to try to mitigate problem resolution in the water sector. Next slide, please. So we set up a very disruptive business model. And the way we look at the water sector is very much like a business sector. So the idea being to generate profit, because it's only through generating profit that we can sustain long-term investments and a proper high-quality access to water resources. So obviously, we are ensuring the quality of the service and water quality control, as well as an adequate water resource management. With local collectivities, we work with them in order to ensure investment long-term. We use as well a wide range of technology in order to reduce operating costs, because we cannot sell water at too high a price. You have to realize that consumption at the rural level is rather limited, so we have to optimize our cost value balance. And once we guaranteed that this was an enduring business model, we managed to attract the co-investment of the Netherlands government as well as the Mali government. Next slide, please. So we cost the consumption model, and we after that we target the south of Mali, which is the region where we operate. The idea being to cover the need of 500,000 people who live in about 50 rural municipalities. Next slide, please. As I said, we devised a business model and quickly realized that actually we were missing the point. Consumption levels were a lot lower than what we had anticipated. There was a very low buy-in from the local population. That very quickly there was a disengagement in front of this process, and we were also faced with significant social conflicts at the village level. Because as you all know, in a village, it's not a homogeneous fabric. There are several communities involved. So in agreement with the donor and the Mali government, we shifted our approach, and we, instead of using manual pumps, we opted for solar pump, a mix of solar pumps and manual pumps, in order to opt for a climate-friendly model, in order to have a lower impact on climate change, and as well as to help us better manage the water resources. Next slide, please. Now, to talk about various challenges we were faced with, here are some of the lessons we drew from our experience. So you might know that international development initiatives were always funded by international donors. So very often people were anticipating more funding. So they were waiting for the next cycle of funding, if you like. And part of the funding traditionally was covering the management of the budget or the admin costs. But what we've developed in our public-private partnership was that a direct investment to the local municipalities. And therefore, there was no budget allocated for admin resources. So this triggered some concerns, and that forced the administration to think about how to cover those costs long term. There was also another fact, so that was a big problem. And the other problem to overcome was the fact that water is considered a gift from God. And that's what I would qualify a social factor. There was also the issue of willingness to pay that needed to be bridged, as well as political factors more linked to election bias and local politics. Next slide, please. Now, what were the key learnings of our experience? Well, first thing I would say, you really have to identify the key drivers to foster participation from local populations. And we were confronted with this issue. You shouldn't overestimate the impact of cutting-edge technology, because there are also very real underlying social factors that will dictate whether local population would buy into the approach or not. Next slide, please. So to conclude, what I would say is that if you are selling water, you have to think of a villager as a consumer, as a client, more than as a user. So you really have to be able to determine his willingness to pay for a service. You also have to approach a village thinking that this is a mosaic of different communities. So you have to diversify and understand the diversified needs at the community, at the village level. And the other thing is that you need to enlist the support of the government in order to reach communities and to convince communities. And for that support, government support, you need to be able to explain very clearly your project to the government, to encourage them to invest in the project. Next slide, please. So here, I just give you some leads in order to foster dialogue during our working group session. So the question I raise here is the question of introducing drinking water as a service in rural areas, requiring to shift the understanding of people, of user that are seen as passive, and move them to a customer position. So we can discuss that further during the working group. I'm done with my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barber, for that very enlightening presentation, and for, I think, for both presenters to again highlight just the adaptation solutions, looking at technology, looking at people, looking at capital, bringing all of these things together into forming that enabling environment. And I'm sure it's going to lead to an excellent breakout session for those who will join that session. I'm very pleased to take us into the second thematic area for discussion, which is the one dealing with data. I'm going to introduce all three speakers to this just to allow an ease of flow as they go into it. But first up speaking, it will be Deepa Karthikeyan and Kun Zung. They'll be doing a joint presentation. Deepa is the co-founder and partner of Athena Infonomics, and Kun is the principal consultant also for Athena Infonomics. Deepa has worked closely with governments and foundations to provide advisory support on urban sanitation and finance, and she has been instrumental in developing and leading a number of multidisciplinary programs to address the challenges of service delivery in changing urban contexts. Her core interests include urban infrastructure and governance, and she also sits on the technical advisory group for the Global Partnership for Development, Data for SDGs. Deepa holds a master's degree in economics from the National University of Singapore, and she also holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Bangalore University. She will be joined by Kun, who engages closely with government and non-government WASH stakeholders in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia on data-related issues. She led the development of a measurement framework for citywide inclusive sanitation and the collection of multi-year CWIS data on service outcomes and systems functions. Kun's core interests lie in applying economic principles and monitoring and evaluation techniques to service delivery, including in WASH. She holds a master's degree in international development and International Economics from Johns Hopkins University, School of Advanced International Studies, and a bachelor's degree in Economics and History from Truman State University. At the end of that presentation, Dr. Yemisi Akbar from Nigeria, from the Assistant Director of Federal Ministry of Water Resources in Nigeria, will be doing her presentation on data. She holds a PhD in Environmental Resource Management and heads the Secretariat team of the National Task Group on Sanitation. It's a coordinating platform for sanitation and hygiene at the national level, and she has also been involved in and contributed to the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector policy documents, capacity building, as well as the design, planning, administration, and monitoring of WASH programs and projects. She provides technical support to the Clean Nigeria Use the Toilet campaign secretariat and represents Nigeria on different regional and international WASH platforms, one of which she is the SWA Alternate Government Focal Point for Nigeria and also a member of the SWA Steering Committee. So let's start off then with the presentation from Athena Infonomics. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm going to let my colleague Quinn lead. Go ahead, Quinn.
Hi, thank you, everyone. So I'm Quinn from Athena Infonomics, and we have been working with government stakeholders at both the city level and state level and national level in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So the presentation today draws from our experience from these countries in working in the WASH sector and with data systems. So the core idea that we want to convey today would be that in order to make sure there is data-driven decision-making for WASH at the intersection of climate, we need to strengthen accountability mechanisms and also invest in data systems. Next slide. So first of all, the common goals that we have is to make sure that we prepare for climate disasters when before they happen, to plan the infrastructure and plan the financing in a way that would allow us to cater to the needs of the most vulnerable poor, and also that when disasters do happen, that we're adequately resourced to respond in a way that would make sure that the WASH service levels are not affected and that the progress achieved is not lost. And both of these would require data-driven decision-making that is based on the usage of climate-embedded WASH data. Next. So on the supply side, we know that climate data is becoming increasingly available because of the different platforms that are there, including the digital assets on climate disasters and risks. And also there is the Internet of Things and the digital revolution, the cellular revolution, which gives us a growing ability to model the climate risks and to provide real-time data to track the disasters when they do happen. And both of these have led to the cost of getting data to go down. However, having more data and lower costing data is not going to automatically translate into more or better usage of data because there are system dysfunctions on the demand side. Next. So the first questions we want to ask would be, who demands the data? What data do they demand? And for what purpose? So at the core of all of this equation is the sanitation and water service authorities. Next. So they need operational data for management, for their day-to-day service management, and also for service planning. And they report data to the national level ministries who need data for strategies, for planning, for policy making, and also for budgetary allocation and for monitoring of the progress. Next. Now, if we look at this equation over here, the data flow is unidirectional. And it's an extractive kind of relationship because the data that the national ministries require is not what the city oftentimes would need for their daily operational management, which need to be the detailed service level data. So the problem over here is that there is weak accountability. The cities don't have good data systems. They're not incentivized to report good data. And so this results in bad data, which then gets used for planning and for budgetary allocation. So which then results in in weak data that doesn't address the problems. And because of the weak data systems, the development partners are then compelled to collect data over and over again in programmatic formats. They do projects and they collect baselines and endline data, but then these data points are often not speaking to each other, and they sit somewhere in different people's laptops, and they're not connected to each other. And the limited data that is the limited kind of use by the city service authorities makes it then that there is limited access and ownership of the data. And this is, again, a unidirectional data flow and an extractive relationship, and that there is rarely much support that is given to build city-level data systems that would contribute to a better system where all of the data would talk to each other. So because of these problems, the city is not incentivized to be transparent, and it is not empowered to effectively engage the private sector service providers. So which then means that there is often not a direct relationship, or often not any data flow or information flow between the service authorities and the communities that need data for accountability, and also the private service providers who also need data for their business value. And that the private service providers often they sit on a lot of data, but the service authorities, the city service authorities, are not able to effectively leverage that data because of this lack of relationship. So all of these, the byproduct of all of these is that there is suboptimal infrastructure, and that there is limited planning and spending. So in order to break this vicious cycle and to create a virtuous cycle, what we want to do is, starting with this relationship that is over there, we want to create information flow from the national ministries to the service authorities at the city level, that to strengthen accountability, we need to have consistent KPIs that would be climate sensitive and that would focus on service level outcomes that are aligned with existing city data systems. And these would not just be the data points that are required for aggregated reporting, but data points that the city service authorities can actually use for planning, for managing their day-to-day operations, and to actually focus on the service levels. And in order to achieve these, we need to have performance targets that are based on the realities, and we need to monitor and enforce with the incentives, so that the cities themselves would have the incentive to collect and produce this data, and to allocate the resources for doing so to improve data transparency. And on the other hand, for the development partners, we also want there to be information flow back into the city service authority, that there would be investments in data systems, that the systems would be strengthened not with the programmatic data collection efforts, but the development partners would ideally pool their efforts to invest in data systems such as integrated monitoring and information systems that are aligned with the needs of the service authorities. And addressing both of these problems would then give the city service authority more data for being transparent with the communities, and also to better leverage the information that could be provided by the private sector, and to better collaborate together. And a very key point over here is that all of the stakeholders in this equation need to follow common standards in data collection, because oftentimes when data don't follow common standards, they cannot be linked to each other, and that they remain as individual and standalone data sets that cannot be used. So this is another key critical thing. So by addressing all of these system dysfunctions, this would empower the cities to become more transparent and to be able to engage the communities and the private sector more effectively. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Quinn and Deepa. I think it's really, again, left us with a lot of food for thought, and that really crucial thing of how to turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. And thank you for outlining specifically how that can be done. Again, I'm sure that will lead to some very good discussions going forward. Dr. Akbar, without any further ado, you may take the floor.
Oh, sorry. Hello, can you hear me? I didn't realize I was muted. So I will be sharing a case study on a groundwater monitoring project, surveillance project that was carried out in the northeast of Nigeria. The northeast of Nigeria is an area that has been the center of insurgency over a period of years now, and this had led to a lot of internal displacement. And with the internal displacement also came people, international and internal support to alleviate the emergency situation. And as part of this, one of the key critical infrastructures that were being constructed was water points. And this was by many of the WASH cluster members. And one thing that was also realized was that many of the water wells were going dry, some of them for the entire year, and also some for no more than half of the year. And the issue around the longer impact of long-term sustainability of these exploitations, came to the fore in view of the current of the climate change effects. And with this, action against hunger was supported with funding from the USAID and with the Nigerian National Hydrological Services Agency, and they were able to carry out a groundwater surveillance project to gather existing groundwater hydrological information into a single groundwater information system. And with this, the project covered 2 states in the northeastern region of Nigeria. And one of the findings from this data that was collected what hydrological data over the past 60 years shows a declining rate of groundwater levels, standing water levels. And also with it were range of water quality issues around elevated nitrate, fluoride, arsenic, and sulfates, and as well as pollution due to human activities. And this is around sewage, being sewage leak into water wells. And when the project looked at what to be done to address all of this. And one of the recommendations was that there's need to expand the hydrological monitoring by installing more groundwater monitoring instruments, and to be able to collect data that can help to assess trends in the level of waters that's available, and looking at over the years what potentials for water availability in view of climate change effects. And then to also ensure that there are some mitigation actions that are put in place. There's need to also enforce existing standards around water quality and drilling, a code of well construction. And with the fact that there are many players on the field that are into water facilities construction, there's also need to ensure that there's quality in constructing these water wells, that they needed the people that they ensure that there are professionals that monitor the construction of these water wells, and that they ensure that the different standards and guidelines for well construction as established by NISA are followed effectively. And then they also ensure that there is need to improve storage and sharing of data. One of the things that we noticed was that there is data inconsistency in the formats of data collection and the actual information that are collected across the field. And so there is need to also ensure that the data collected are uniform, and so that this provides basis for comparison and basis for trend analysis. And apart from this case study regarding this Northeast groundwater surveillance, in Nigeria, the data environment is also something that across the country we have the WASH National Information Management System, and which provides real-time data that captures wash information across the country. But in because it does not have a national outlook, in 2018, the country came out with a national survey that helps to capture the wash indicators. And this is to help us have a national representative data, and not just data that could also help us in planning and also to monitor progress. And so the first edition of that happened in 2018, and it looks at different indicators. Over 160 something indicators were captured in that survey that looked at facilities coverage and functionality. It also looked at issues around gender and inclusion and sustainability practices. What are the practices on the field that helps to ensure that effects of climate change are either mitigated or adapted, and ensure that there is sustainable access to wash services across the communities. And it also looks at the quality of service. There's a special focus on utilities, on what they are doing, and on how they are able to ensure that they sustain their delivery of services to consumers. And so Nigeria currently has the third cycle of that report that is published, and also helps in advocacy, because the way Nigeria is structured, we have the national government, and we have the state and local government structures that are charged with the provision of these facilities. And so when we have this information, it helps to engage with all these different levels of government to help them plan for sustainable services. And then we have what we call the wash information management system that this is a platform where information is gathered right from the local from the community, and this is done by the local government structures, and they put in this information in real time, and we can assess it at the national level. And one of the things we noticed that most of the states are not reporting on this platform, which has been a challenge, because if this happens, we'll be able to have a national outlook data on the status of wash in the country. But because many partners are not, states are not reporting, and also many partners are not reporting, we are actually having a whole drive to ensure that not only the government, but other partners are also involved in wash interventions, also ensure that their data goes into that platform. And then we currently have 22 out of 36 states in Nigeria that have information on that platform. And for the benefits, we are hoping that this will help us, to have overall improvement in facilities. One of the things that is also being done to ensure sustainability is that especially for water points in rural communities, is that they put in loggers and then tracking systems that could help to know when the water facility has issues and when it's broken down, when the water level has gone down, and then to also provide support to address whatever issues with those water facilities. And overall, having all this information will help to ensure that communities, especially the rural communities, have water sources that are available to them at all times. And Nigeria also made a strategic policies that says many of our water sources, especially the rural ones, will be migrated from being AMPOPs into solar-powered facilities, and this will be help to reduce the energy consumption that is associated with motorized facilities, as well as to also address issues around power. And then for our wash norm, we are using that, being a national data, we are using that to be able to make interventions. So it's helping to ensure intervention profiling, because it establishes areas where there are gaps, areas around management, areas around functionality, areas around access, and different interventions that are required to ensure that Nigerians have access to climate resilient and sustainable wash services. Is what the wash norm is helping us to achieve. And with this is with the support of different stakeholders. The data are validated by all the stakeholders. And currently the washing platform is also being created, and advocacy is also being carried out to all partners to ensure that we have uniformity in our data, in our data collection format, and so that this will provide the basis for comparability, and also to ensure that they are available to the public to have that information for their use. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akbar, for that really, really helpful and wonderful presentation. And it flew. There was a really nice flow between the two presentations, which was lovely to see. So, colleagues, we will now move on to the third part, or third thematic area, which is looking at finance. We have three speakers for this session, and just very quickly to introduce them in the order in which they will speak. So first up will be Boari Rakoto Veloma Nanswa. She has a strong experience in water sanitation and hygiene, not unfamiliar to many of us. She has been working in the wash sector for more than 15 years. And in addition to her university studies, particularly in urban and rural water management and business management, she has acquired fruitful experiences in the fields of international management, sector governance, and integrated water resource management in Madagascar. In terms of public-private partnerships, she has held various expertise and management positions, including that of program manager within an international cooperation organization, JICA, where she has notably highlighted her capacities as a developer of the project and the experience of relations with technical and financial partners. She was also the Director General of the National Water and Sanitation Authority, ANDEA, in 2019, and then, as most of you will know, was then Minister of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene until 2021, a period during which she revitalized the wash sector in Madagascar with the return of certain donors for structuring projects, as well as collaboration with SWA. The strength is reflected in the strengthening of partnerships, donors, TFPs, as well as the promotion of public-private partnerships. She will be following Ms. Bauri. We'll have Mr. Kulu, Professor Jo, who holds a bachelor's degree in natural sciences and from the University of Cote d'Ivoire in Abidjan. And he's also a holder of a master's degree in forest sciences and in forest management and silviculture from Laval University in Quebec, Canada. Our last speaker on this panel will be Mr. Mohamed Nada, Director of the Development of the UCD for Suez in Africa. Mohamed Nada is an engineer from the Combined University of Technology and University of Pennsylvania, also a holder of an MBA from the L'École Nationale de Pont et Chaussée. Mohamed Nada is committed to the development of sustainable renewable energy, infrastructure, and access to water, and initially as a climate change consultant. We will welcome all three, and I'm sure they'll enlighten us. Due to being maybe a bit too ambitious, we are running a little bit behind time, colleagues, but what we will do is ensure that the breakout sessions allow for the maximum discussion and then summarize as quickly as possible towards the end to finish on time. But without any further ado, let me welcome Ms. Vauri to take the floor. Vauri, I wonder if you could unmute your line. We can't hear you yet.
Excusez-moi. Bonjour à tous.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. I was well introduced by the team of SWA, and I thank you for your collaboration. I'm going to share Madagascar models regarding finance and as well as private and public partnership and connection between WASH and climate. Next slide, please. The context of Madagascar concerning the context of lack of sources. I'm not going to get into detail, but in 2006, we have the beginning of the engagement of private sector in terms of providing of services and watch for, so as to say that PPP would be one of the approach to improve management and also periodizations of works that in terms of infrastructure. For 2010, 29% of infrastructure built are working. And in 2011, actually, we had a mobilization of the technical and financial partners, as well as engagements of private members to develop and promote the public-private partnership. The case of Madagascar that I'm sharing with you today, Madagascar signed the Glasgow Convention for the equitable plan and resilience for climate change. And this has to do with what we are sharing with you today in this presentation. Next slide, please. If we talk about financing, I'm going to tell you that we lose millions and millions of dollars without investments that are adequate in financing, funding, and as well as effect of the climate change. Next slide, please. A diagram that is very simple from of the public-private partnership for the wash provision of service. We can see here that what are the phases of financing. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The models of investments I'm going to share here about the private aspect. Since the engagement of in 26, we can see the first private member that engage in investment with the municipality in a suburban area, so as to prepare the capturing of water after the drought. We lost the sound. No sound. We can't hear her.
We seem to have lost our speaker.
Yes, we did.
Okay. All right. I wonder if we should just give her a few minutes to see if she can reconnect, because she's sort of right in the middle of the presentation. Let's just see if we can get her to reconnect. Okay, colleagues, I wonder if it would be useful at this point okay, I see Valerie coming back on. Okay, let's see. I think we're reconnected.
Sorry, excusez-moi. Est-ce que vous pouvez passer au... Comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, il y a eu l'investissement.
As I said, in terms of the investment of private members and management of a private, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. You can see through the picture that the connection, which is very important with investments, that private, and in the case of PPP, at the same time, we have the collaboration with the municipalities and rural or urban municipalities that are attracting, guaranteeing the provision of water of the village, of municipalities or towns or cities. Next slide, please. Here we can see through the case of Madagascar, it's not only in Madagascar, but in the southern area of Madagascar, we have a great deal of drought, and the solution that the multi-usage of in Madagascar with feeding water, provision of water for agriculture and cattle raising. We also had a financing by another partner with the ministry in charge of water, and also an investment of a private at that range from 10 to 12%. According to the investment of infrastructure, and the private member is going to manage the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about the investment of private members. In the next slide, we have from 5 to 12% of the investment that will be taken care by the private sector. And we'll have a small companies with $200,000. It could seem very low in terms of the budget, but in terms of the small and middle-sized company, we had 15,000 people that have access to water at every moment in a good quantity. The approach of management and that is shared with the partners. And now we have many partners that are following this in Madagascar, and we have a range of functionality that exceeds 3% after the using of this system. Next slide, please. Well, in terms of the goals of the private members is basically in order to contribute to the access to drinking water in terms of the sites of intervention, but as well as the use of water, not only stop in terms of drinking water, but in rural area to foster small income for farming and access to water for cattle raising reasons. Next slide, please.
Valerie, can I ask you to just do one more slide just to round up, just because time's not on our side and technology. If you could just do one rounding up slide, please. Thank you.
Merci. Vous pouvez passer à l'avant-dernier diapo.
So let's go to not the last, but one after the last slide, please. Well, actually, the challenges and perspective is to mobilize more financing in terms of the climate funds. And we know that only 0.03% are dedicated or allocated to WASH. About this, I'd like to talk about one of the previous presentation to promote these public and private investments, to perennize investments made, and so as to increase an effective investment with the private population and all the stakeholders, including everything in terms of an effective aspect. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really, really excellent. Without any further ado, Mr. Kalu, you're welcome to the floor.
Je vous remercie de me passer la parole. Avant tout propos,
thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to thank the SWA partnership as well as all the organizers and all the participants. So I'd like to discuss with you our project, which was the introduction of the regional rural development funds to facilitate the development of rural areas in Ivory Coast. So to give you a brief introduction, what I would like to say is that to make up for the deficit in equipment, the Ivorian authorities they set up those regional rural development funds, which were active up until 2002. This was supported by the European Union. So the authorities in charge of managing those FRAR were tasked with improving living conditions of populations and to reduce the disparities in regions as well as between regions. So the funding system involved the state, which was financing up to 90%, with an additional contribution from local beneficiaries at the height of 10%. So what were the outcomes of these projects, of these regional rural development funds? Well, the outcomes of this program was seen at different levels, and they contributed to improve the living conditions of rural populations, particularly in villages at the national level. So in total, about 15 socio-economic sectors were involved in this project. However, I will focus my presentation on three main sectors. First, education, then healthcare in rural areas, and hydraulics at the village level. So when it comes to hydraulics in villages, the main objective was to equip villages with manual water pumps as well as water towers in order to stock water. Also install fire hydrants for different neighborhoods and to set up a limited amount of meters. When it comes to the education sector, it mainly focused on the construction of primary schools. When it comes to healthcare, the priority was to build health centers, among which clinics and maternity wards, and to fight against endemic disease, to overcome great endemics. So when it comes to hygiene, at the village level, the whole community was involved. So that involved, for example, regular sweeping of concessions and surrounding areas every morning. That also involved collection of wandering animal droppings. The large-scale maintenance and opening of trucks was also one of the priorities. Sanitation was ring-fenced as part of programs dedicated to the development of urban centers. So in terms of local population buy-in and satisfaction of beneficiaries, what we saw in the education sector is that we reached an adoption rate of the project works of 91.3%, as well as in the hydraulics sector, 87.5%. As for the healthcare sector, 82% of adoption rate by the local population. So this is a rather high adoption rate. And when it comes to WASH, this was a very welcome innovation. Now, when it comes to key learnings from this project, as well as the funding aspects, when this project was launched in 1970, that represented a flagship innovation. And the novelty of this project resided in the decentralization of decision-making and the uniqueness of this project was, as I said, the devolution of decision-making to rural areas for the construction of basic infrastructure. And like other flagship innovation programs, which were led at a regional level. Now, we've analyzed, obviously, different weaknesses of the project. So despite questionable outcomes, it remains that the project had encouraging results, which helped to improve WASH indicators. So one of the weaknesses that we identified was that in some areas were not eligible for the financing of the FRAR, so the Regional Rural Development Funds at the time, due to their limited village size, financial resources, and population. Due to increasing poverty levels, with the impoverishment rate progressing from 10% in 1985 to more than 38% in 2002, the compounding effect of a sudden drop in agricultural intrant prices and the rising inflation rate, well, the system reached a point of stagnation and saturation in terms of the financing capacity of the population. So this is the main weakness we identified. So the interpreter has now lost the speaker. It's not possible to hear the speaker, I'm afraid.
Okay. I think it looks like we may have lost the speaker. We've lost interpretation. I think we're going to invite Mr. Mohammed Nader to start his presentation now, simply because we really are struggling with time, especially with the technology breakouts. Mr. Nader, over to you. But that was the Director General, Mr. Kalu from Côte d'Ivoire, Director General for Water Resources in the Ministry of Water Resources and Forestry. Over to you, Mr. Nader.
Je voulais dire que par rapport à l'analyse qui a été faite, les propositions qui ont été
Bonjour à
faites,
tous et merci pour l'invitation. Très heureux d'être parmi vous. Alors l'objectif c'était.
I would like to thank you for inviting me to take part in this workshop. The objective within this funding session was to present the singularity of the project we implemented in Ivory Coast, it is unique in its funding mechanism. So for those who are not familiar with the SWA group, I would like to quickly introduce the group. So we have a historical presence in Africa. We've been implanted for more than 160 years. We're an international group. We are represented in the 5 continents. We have about 35,000 employees. Our 2 main areas of activities are water management and waste management. We offer our services to 67 million users, to whom we offer access to drinkable water. We also generate 3.1 tons of water and of renewable energy, and we recycle it. Well, also very green in our mode of operation. Now, I'd like to discuss the project Eau pour tous, Water for All, which we were honored to be involved with in Ivory Coast. I will then highlight one solution that the group has implemented to accelerate the access to drinking water in Africa, but more generally in emerging countries. So this solution combines different technologies that we basically compact and operationalize those structures. We are offering decentralized compact units. So we're talking about a capacity of 5 cubic meter per hour, which is what is usually consumed in rural areas, to up to 2,500 cubic meter per hour, which is the average consumption in urban environments. So the idea here is really to combine compact, modular, and containerized solutions, because we've discussed the impact of climate change on the quality of water throughout the year. Our solutions clearly offer an adaptable solution of this variability in water quality throughout the year. This ensures the highest standards of quality throughout the year. So these solutions, to discuss what is the link with our project in Ivory Coast and to present the main advantages. Well, they are compact, as I said, so they are they use 2.5 less space than the conventional and traditional solutions. They are modular, which enables us to cope in case of a shortage of funding. For example, when we have to scale up our capacity to produce drinkable water. So currently we are faced with an existing deficit, but we also have to anticipate our need towards 2030, especially for areas which are in which see an increase in population. So this enables us to anticipate funding and to forecast what we will need in terms of budget for a specific year. And we can also anticipate the increase in capacities in the years to come and foster some synergies with what we're currently doing. So we, thanks to our civil engineering capacities, we can deploy our energy generating stations as quickly as we can for larger capacity. So our structures enables us to use solar energy, which makes them entirely independent. So we can capture this solar energy and reduce our CO2 emissions through, and that's optimal in terms of attracting potential investors to support the implementation of these projects. So in terms of Ivory Coast, this project was initiated. By the way, I would like to salute Mr. Kolu because we worked with him in partnership with him as well as with the Ministry of Water and Water Management in Ivory Coast. The idea really was quite new. It was a groundbreaking idea. We wanted to depart from traditional funding models, i.e. tendering, and we wanted to really launch a made-to-measure product solution that was fully adapted to the needs of the local municipalities. So we were able to attract different modes of export credit. The fact that we are quite green and that we can reduce our energy consumption present a clear advantage and enables us to put forward this significant advantage because we have a less impact in terms of our solar powered infrastructure can have in terms of environmental impact if you compare that to concrete power stations. So we worked hand in hand with the Ministry of Water in Ivory Coast. We installed 40 UCD to accelerate the access to water in 32 secondary cities. We, as a result, increased the Ivory Coast safe water access by about 20%. We were financed through BPI France export credit, and we worked in partnership with a local partner, which translated into improved, enhanced local employment opportunities in the country. So I will cut short my presentation because I'm aware that we are a bit pressed for time. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll stop right here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nalis, especially thank you for keeping to the time there. So colleagues, we obviously have run very much behind schedule, probably an indication of the poor moderation on my side, so I apologize up front for that. But I do promise that you'll have your 20 minutes in your breakout sessions. What we will do is ask that you select somebody who will give feedback to us. If possible, that you open up a PowerPoint presentation and have one slide with just the challenges and another slide with all the solutions. We will have a very short time to summarize all of that when we come back from the sessions. So we'll have about 20 minutes now and then about 5 to 10 minutes for report back before we conclude. And so in a way, we're really relying on you to do that. Could you please try to keep your inputs to under a minute in the session, just to allow as much participation as possible? There are 52 participants. You will be assigned to a breakout room automatically as soon as we give the go. And if you could then please just do that. Remember also that there's no simultaneous translation in the breakout room. So do try to speak slowly and allow for the translators to be able to pick that up. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to thank the last three speakers, Zawari, Mr. Kalu, and Mr. Mohamed Nada, for your presentations and for setting the scenes. And for all 7 speakers, we're now able to go into the breakout room.
Normal. Ce que je vois là, c'est ce que je vois.
OK. Nous excusons de n'avoir pas pu donner la parole à Madame qui avait levé la main. C'est dommage.
Gavin, you're mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Welcome back, everybody. And thank you for wonderful discussions in the breakout rooms. The ones I attended were really great. If we could just have the rapporteur then from breakout group on enabling environment. If you could just identify yourself and then present very, very quickly. Please, let's just try to maybe focus on the solutions just because we're pressed for time. We have 10 minutes left and we have 2 minutes for each feedback. So onto the enabling environment group. Are you ready to present?
Oui, je vais essayer de faire ça.
Merci.
Yes, I'll try to do that. As you said, it's not very simple because in 20 minutes to have an idea of the different problems and solutions, basically what we said is different countries talked and evidenced problematics that are very similar. The process of climate change that have an impact on water in the sector, sandbank of water, surface water, adaptation of farming in terms of climate change, etc., degradation of soils, and the solutions that were presented can be summarized in projects like the Cooperation of Development have been doing, and a project that has a goal in terms of specific problems. What we can tell you is that we would need a project that would be much more integrated and with the reinforcement of the institutional aspect to provide PPPs, public and private projects. And this, according to the Mali, also in terms of drinkable water and rural water. So for each one to play his or her role and implications and responsibilities and duties should be very clear for private members, for sponsors, and for the government. It's not the case. This is something that had to do in terms of independently of the issue, sandbanks of rivers, and also there is a very clear framework to define that each one should play their role and to create integrated project that could answer in an effective and very sustainable way. So basically, this is what I can tell you about the discussions that we had in the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bobo. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
And on to Deepa for the data group.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. We had a really good discussion in the group. I think there were a lot of very practical challenges about collecting, using data at the field level. And I think this is a really important point. We've learned over and over again that challenge will only be addressed if we shift the conversation from monitoring to data use. And the point that I think comes through the discussions we had in our group was that there needs to be clear investments in building infrastructure for data management, data collection and management at the level of local governments or service authorities or as close to the field as possible. And we are quite likely going to be in a better position to monitor data or to think about planning or budgetary allocations or any of the higher order decision making that needs to be done with more reliable data coming from the field. And for more reliable data to come from the field, there needs to be systematic investments in data collection, management, and use infrastructure at the field level. And there needs to be an alignment of what good looks like so that donors and governments and local authorities are not pulling in different directions. So I think the emphasis was, let's have a common minimum vision of what good looks like, including data standards that define it. Let's come together and invest in building data systems at the local level so that higher order priorities like monitoring and strategy and policy can build off of those systems rather than work with unreliable data in silos. So for us, the big shift was let's move away from just building MIS systems and continuing to demand data of institutions that simply do not have the systems to generate and produce it. Those were some key takeaways from the conversation, which we thought were very practical and useful.
Thank you very much for that feedback. And on to the finance group. Who's feeding it? Finance group?
Oui, je vais faire le partage.
Barry, go ahead.
Oui. On a une discussion.
So we had a very discussion where we talked about challenges in the Ivory Coast was in terms of urbanization. I think this is the case of many of the countries in Africa concerning urbanization, that we do not have the appropriate solutions. Our challenge in terms of Kinshasa, they have water resources, but the rate of access to drinkable water is very poor. So it's not coherent, according to one of our participants. And we also have a challenge, not only of water resources, but also of financing. And this causes that the solutions are not convergent towards the expected result. Another challenge is the political will in terms of synergy regarding a project, a water project for water provision, also water, sanitation, hygiene. In terms of solutions, the solutions proposed were, the first one is the political will, and financing will follow up, because we would need a very good communication, synergy of all the ministries. In the case of Ivory Coast, we had a very good communication of the different ministries, not only the technical ministries, but also the finance ministry, and this would be very well willed in terms of this political will. So financing and the technical aspect are already here as the Suez solution. Another solution that was shared a few moments ago for Suez was in the case of Congo. This is a solution that is very well adapted in the rural area with the compact unit regarding the treatment, water treatment. These are the discussions that we had, but I'd like to add something in terms of the challenge, talking about Madagascar, as I talked some minutes ago. If we do not have the political will and being aware that we need financing and all the technical solutions continue technical solutions, I'd like to use this to increase our platform in terms of advocacy regarding looking for solutions and also having more financing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I see a hand up. Dr. Tavares, would you go ahead? Thank you, everybody, for the feedback from the different sessions. It's really an indication of how well the problems are understood and the solutions also on the continent, that we've been able to have this meeting in such a way that I was looking at my clock the whole time and wondering if it was broken. Time seemed to be flying past at a rate that was actually beyond anything normal. And I think it's, again, a strength of this particular meeting. I'd like to thank all the speakers, all 8 of them, who really set the field for this discussion. Mr. Vital Tavares, Mr. Thierry Barbot, Dr. Alomisi Akpa, Deepa, Kartikayan, Kun Zhang, Mr. Kalu, Wari, and Mr. Mohammed Nada. Thank you so much for your inputs. Thank you everybody for taking part today. As I mentioned earlier, the solutions and challenges will be put together into a compendium. These will be used at COP27, and we will also be using part of the session to share the information with all of you. I feel like we could have had this session extend for another hour or two, and I think it's a really, really great start. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the colleagues at SWA and to everybody for making this a success. Until we meet again, thank you so much.
Merci.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Au revoir.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Kevin Roussel.
Thank you, Mr. Kevin.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Merci à tous. Au revoir.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Merci.
On est vraiment venu en retard. Merci à tous. Merci à tous.
Thank you, everyone.